Grade 10. How is everybody doing? I miss everyone so much, and I hope everyone's doing well. And welcome to our new e-learning platform here on Google Classroom. It's pretty amazing, and I hope everybody will, get used to using it and becoming comfortable with it because at the end of the day, it's pretty amazing. And even though these times are uncertain, fortunately for us, the school has provided us with this platform so we can continue with our lessons. And with that, hope you enjoy this. I will attempt to present you chapter 13, still in the European Middle Ages, and we'll do section 2, which covers feudalism in Europe. And the objectives for this lesson, we're going to have 3 themes. If you've looked ahead in the book, the section is pretty long and pretty dense, so I tried to water it down the best I could and give you the basics, because in reality, feudalism is a very, very dense and thick topic. People have studied feudal societies very intensely. There's a lot of ink has been spilled on feudalism. So this lesson is just to kind of give you, the basics, the watered down version. So with that, our first theme, we're just going to explain what feudalism is, kind of define it, just so you have a general idea. Then we can talk about in theme 2 why feudalism emerged in Europe. And theme 3, we're going to explain something called the manor system, which has to do with the economics of feudalism. And we can relate this back to section 1, in particularly the changing style of governing that was taking place in the early Middle Ages, if you remember. People were changing, the styles of government were changing from loyalty to the state, being good law-abiding citizens, to more of personal ties, loyalty through personal ties and family ties. So feudalism, had a lot to do with that, so we can link that in. Anyways, we'll begin here with theme 1, what is feudalism? And your book defines feudalism as a system of governing and landholding based on social structure of rights and obligations. So the key words here in that definition, actually there's 3, governing and social structure. So feudalism is as we're going to see, is fueling this changing style of governance, and it modeled the way society was structured. So if you think back to our lesson in chapter 2 about Hinduism and the caste system, it has a pyramid structure, kind of like the caste system that I know that you're familiar with. But it was not as rigid as the caste system. At the top of the pyramid is the king, or a wealthy landowner, or a noble, and then your next class would be the knights, and then maybe mid-level merchants, and at the very bottom, which was the largest class, was the peasant class. And I'm going to show you a visual here in a minute in the PowerPoint so you can actually get a grasp of what we're speaking about. But in the feudal system, you're familiar with this with the caste system. In the feudal system, one's social status determined a person's prestige and power. And again, one's class was inherited. So if you were born into the peasant class, you were going to be a peasant. And this is not to say that you couldn't move up and down, but generally where you were born is where you stayed. And I think you're familiar with this, again, with your knowledge of the caste system. So again, if you were born as a knight, you had more power and prestige in the society as a peasant. You know the story. So to continue theme 1, what is feudalism? How feudalism worked is that a king or a lord or a noble would give a piece of land to someone, and it was known as a fief, this piece of land, and that's why they were called fiefdoms. And he would give it to a vassal. So a king would give a land to a lord, and that lord would become the king's vassal. And in return, this vassal would pledge allegiance to the king. Allegiance as in, if this king is ever in need of, let's say, military backup, I will be there. Do you need some extra workers sometime for something, a project that you're doing? I will supply them for you. So in return for that land, this vassal would give the king or the high noble their allegiance. And most importantly, during this time, allegiance meant military support. So that's how it worked. As feudalism developed as a social and economic structure, the vast majority of the people in Europe were low-class peasants. And in the feudal system, these peasants are called serfs. And you might have heard this word before. A serf is a feudal term for the working class, the peasant class. And they too pledged allegiance to the vassal, the owner of the land. So they said, yes, we will come work for you, we will tend the land for you, we will raise the crops for you, but in exchange, we want protection and keep some of the food and a place to live. So that's what they were working for. It sounds kind of nice, but it really wasn't. If you were a serf, we'll talk about it later, your life really wasn't that good. A serf really had no rights in this feudal system. I mean, the serfs could not lawfully leave the land of the vassal. I mean, although they're not slaves. We're not talking slaves like ball and chain. But their labor, their work belonged to the lord, noble, whoever that is protecting them. So, not a slave, but you are basically laboring for free for somebody, and that's the life of a serf. And this is what is defining the feudal system. Is this type of social structure? Okay, and again, I want to say if there's any questions, this Google Classroom provides a wonderful platform for us to have discussions on these lessons, or we can always reach out via Facebook, things like that. But again, I will encourage you to use Google Classroom because it's really wonderful. So, still in theme 1, here's a visual now of what I was speaking about a few slides ago. Here's kind of the graphic of the social structure of feudalism in medieval Europe. And as you can see, the top is the king, and then right below him you have the fiefs and the lords that he would give the fiefs to. And again, we call them vassals. And then below them is like the knight class, lord class, and then below them is the peasant class. So you can see how the social structure flows, and what each class, in exchange for allegiance, which each class gives the other. So allegiance to the king, a lord gets a fief and peasants. So that means he's getting land and workers. And then these lords provide protection, shelter, and food for the knight class, who again will fight for them, their military service, in exchange for that. And then you have the serf class, who again gets protection, food, shelter, but they have to farm the land and pay rent to the lords. So again, not too good for the serfs. And this is a good visualization for you to see how it works. And this should be familiar to you. looking at social structures, because we covered the caste system when we talked about Hinduism. But it's different, but similar in structure. Okay, so we tackled what is feudalism. That is the basics of feudalism. It's of course a bit more complicated than that, but that's kind of, just the basic. It's, a governing and land-holding system that created a type of social structure, and it's the way the medieval Europe would function socially and politically. Okay, so theme 2. So we have something called feudalism. We know what it is kind of now, so why did it emerge in Europe? And this is where we have to link it back to our previous lesson. So feudalism emerged out of these Germanic and Nordic invasions that came from the north. If you remember, in section 1, we talked about how these Germanic tribes ended the Roman Empire. Well, they continued to invade Europe once the Roman Empire collapsed. And what we said also in the last section is that these invasions broke down the central authority, i.e. the Roman Empire. So people could not be protected by the central power. So they turned for other sources of power for protection. And this, again, goes back to what we learned on the changing styles of governance. So as the central power broke down, people needed to seek out a noble or a lord for protection, and this is how it changed. This is how we start to get the changing styles of government and the formation of feudalism in Europe. And eventually, as this would develop, as the local populations turned to lords and nobles who themselves had their own armies and could defend against invaders, these independent lords would gain loyal populations. So, and these lords were granted lands by, the king or the higher ups, for lack of a better word. And they'd have their own little independent thing going on with their own, independent loyal populations. So, feudalism, we can trace it back to these Germanic invasions that were taking place and the breakdown of the central authority when the Roman Empire collapsed. So that was just a brief overview of why we see feudalism emerge, and I hope it made sense. So we can move on to theme 3, and this is more of like the economic side of it. So something during feudal Europe, something called the manor system developed. So when a vassal was given a fief, they created something called a manor. And this is basically the core of feudalism, because it was based around the manor. And you can define it as the basic economic arrangement of the Middle Ages. And the manor system is based around a set of rights and obligations between a lord and his serfs. So, I give you the right to live on the land. You are obliged to work my land and give me the products, the crop, or whatever they're doing. So the Lord, again, provided the serfs with housing and protection from bandits. And again, serfs did things like, tending the land, caring for animals, and any other thing that the Lord or vassal wanted them to do. And we're going to go back to the life of the serf. I kind of touched upon it a little bit in theme 1 of the first slides. But the life of a serf was not very good, especially in the manor system. And again, I'm going to have a visual on the next coming slides here, and shows you what a manor actually looked like. And it will come to make more sense. But A serf in his lifetime would never travel more than 30 kilometers from their lord's manor. So they were basically bound to the land. They would not go really anywhere. Your whole life as a serf would just be working the land of your vassal that you had pledged allegiance to. The manor itself consisted of the Lord's house. So you have the kind of like, I guess, the castle or whatever, a plot of farmland. It would most definitely have a church. It would have the various workshops and a small village that consisted of about 15 to 30 families, and these would be, the serfs. So it's kind of what we would say a single, independent, self-sufficient community. They produced everything themselves, so they're growing their own crops, they're making their own tools, they're making everything themselves, and they only imported anything that they really, 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 really needed. Like if they needed something to make a specific kind of tool for farming, they would import that from maybe another fiefdom or something like that. But generally, these manors were independent, self-sufficient communities. And going back to the serfs, I know we're kind of jumping back and forth here. The serfs, for the privilege of living on the land, for the privilege, we should say not living, for the privilege of working on the land, these peasants paid heavy taxes. So basically, they're not really being paid. I mean, when they are paid, they basically have to give it back on taxes. They're just basically giving a place to live and to work. So they paid tax on anything they grew. Even marriage was taxed. So, they had to pay money to get married, and that's only if the lord or the vassal gave them permission to do so. So they're very much controlled, very much what we could say exploited for their labor. And their life basically revolved around long hours of work. You would get up in the morning, work the fields until the nighttime, and probably do more work after you couldn't work in the field. So children were put to work at a very young age. The lifespan of serfs on the manor was very short. Life expectancy was about 35 years old. So if you made it to 35 and you were a serf, you were considered an old, very old person. You somehow survived. Most of these serfs suffered from illnesses and malnutrition. So they weren't eating well, and they were the ones who were subjected to like the diseases that would come around. It was always the serfs that would bear the brunt of this. So I guess you can say, unless you were the lord of the manor, you lived a pretty rough life, and feudalism did, create a lot of distance between classes. There was a massive gap between the lord and the serfs in terms of quality of life, and this is the social structure that ran Europe for, you can say, up until maybe 1600s, into like the Industrial Revolution even. So, anyways, here is more of a visual for you to kind of understand what a manor would look like. You see the castle on the hill, the little village, the little fields, the water mill, the church. So this gives you a visual of, the self-sufficient community, the independent self-sufficient community. This is where a serf's life, they would live out their life here in something like this. So I hope that visual gives you a bit more sense of what we're talking about in the manor system. And they produce their own things. And that is the end of the lesson. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this, as this is my first attempt at making a video like this. I hope I explained it well, and if not, again, I encourage you to use this platform, Google Classroom. We can talk about the lesson. I can clarify things. I can send you links to further readings if you're interested in this topic. So again, I just want to thank you, and I hope we can continue doing this for the time that we're out of school, because fortunately we can continue to learn. So I'll see you again.